Good morning and thank you for tuning in. We're working through a series called A Community That, and then we're filling in those blanks. Last week we looked at a community that loves. This week we're looking at a community that walks. Let me explain. This one is a little bit more abstract than last week. A community that loves, that's pretty straightforward. It's almost self-explanatory. And, Jesus commanded that we love one another. And so I didn't really have to work real hard to prove my point, right? Jesus told us to love each other. He commanded it. But a community that walks, that's a little more vague, a little more abstract. And so I will flesh that out a little bit during this sermon. So remember that we're focusing on bringing intentionality, bringing thought into the life of our church community, our church family, and that has a real that has a real meaning for this local community, Lincoln City Church of Christ, the church that I preach to. But wherever you are, I understand that a lot of you live all over the United States and all over the world. I encourage you to bring intentionality and thought into the church that you are a part of. Into your interaction with your church family, wherever you are. And so this morning we're talking about a community that walks. And so curiosity got the best of me, and I asked Google, how many miles did Jesus walk during his ministry? And so during those 3, give or take some years, where he was ministering throughout the Judean and Galilean countryside, and in the cities too, how far did Jesus walk? And the answer that I got from the internet was 3,125 miles. So don't ask me where that number comes from. I know that you can't necessarily trust everything on the internet, but that was the answer that I got. Jesus walked around 3,125 miles during his time ministering to people. But the gist of that is, the point of that is that Jesus walked a lot. He spent, most of his time walking. We get these little glimpses of Jesus in one city and then in another city. What we don't really have the picture of is the in-between time that he spent just walking along the road. But he would have had to have spent most of his days walking. He might walk 4 or 5 or 6 hours to spend 1 or 2 hours in a village and then move on. And so we know that Jesus was somebody who walked, but Jesus didn't walk alone. Jesus walked to people. He walked alongside of people, and Jesus invited people to walk with him. It kind of makes me think about that Johnny Cash song that I'm sure you've heard, where Johnny Cash is talking about everywhere that he's been, and the chorus goes, "I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere." And that's, you could say that about Jesus. He was everywhere. He was all over the place. As followers of Jesus, we are a community that walks. And I'm not talking about physical walking. I'm talking about having the mindset, the perspective that we are sojourners. We are followers. We are pilgrims, right? That we are a community that walks in the footsteps of Jesus, walks through life together, and we're walking to our heavenly, eternal home. Many of you have probably heard of John Muir. John Muir was a naturalist and a preservationist and a writer in the 1800s, and he did a lot of walking. But it's interesting because he had a bone to pick with the idea of hiking. This is what he said about hiking. He said, "I don't like either the word or the thing. People ought to saunter through the mountains, not hike." Do you know the origin of the word saunter? It's a beautiful word. Way back in the Middle Ages, people used to go on pilgrimages to the Holy Land. And when people in the villages through which they passed through asked where they were going, the travelers would reply, "A la Sante Terre," which means to the Holy Land, Sante Terre. And so they became known as Sante Terreurs, Saunterers. And John Muir supposedly said, now these mountains are our holy land, and we ought to saunter through them reverently, not hike through them. So that's a quote that is attributed to John Muir. Whether or not he actually said it, it's hard to know. But that idea that we ought to pay attention to the way that we walk. Are we just kind of hiking through life on our own, quickly passing through? Or are we sauntering? Are we part of a pilgrimage, part of a community where we have traveling companions and we walk alongside of others as we journey to the Holy Land, as we journey to our eternal home? The Apostle Peter puts it very clearly in his first letter. So 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. Now, you'll quickly notice that the context of this has to do with behavior. But Peter, in the midst of a passage where he's talking about Christian behavior, gives a descriptive title to Christians. And so we get a little taste of what our identity is. So 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11, Peter says to the church scattered throughout Asia, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles." The New King James uses the words sojourners and pilgrims. It says, "I urge you to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul." So the Apostle Peter in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11, uses those words sojourners and pilgrims as a way to identify Christians. The context there is a contrast between the world of the pagans and the world of disciples. The pagans, they don't abstain from fleshly desires, they give in to them. But you, as sojourners and pilgrims, are to move on from your fleshly desires. You are to, in your journey away from sin and away from your fleshly desires. Leaving that stuff behind the way that a pilgrim would leave the last place they were behind and move on to the next place. And so that descriptive title, that identifier as the church, as a group of pilgrims or a group of sojourners, is really important. It tells us who we are, and it helps us to think about ourselves as a community that walks. So I want to focus more on the implications of being pilgrims. I want us to kind of flesh that out. If we are a community that walks, if we are a community of pilgrims, what is implied there? How does that affect our communal life? To use a term that we used last week, our life in community. How does being a pilgrim or a group of travelers, a group of sojourners, affect our community life as a church? We're just talking about the church in the 21st century, the modern day Christian church. It's not necessarily how the modern church sees itself. Do we see ourselves as a community that walks? We have this rich history in the churches of Christ of singing hymns that conjure up the imagery of pilgrims on a journey. The hymn that came to my mind when I was preparing this message was the one that says, "Here we are but straying pilgrims. Here our path is often dim. But to cheer us on our journey, still we sing this wayside hymn." And the chorus goes, "Yonder over the rolling river, where the shining mansions rise, soon will be our home forever. And the smile of the blessed giver gladdens all our longing eyes." That is a pilgrim song, right? But people don't write church music like that anymore. If you turn on K-Love or the Christian radio station, most likely you're not going to hear a song that conjures up the imagery of a community that walks, of a community of pilgrims. In fact, I took it upon myself to look at the Billboard music chart for Christian worship songs. And in the top 10 worship songs, I could not find one that was a song about Christian community. They all had titles like My Jesus or Hold On to Me. And reading the lyrics of some of these top 10 Christian worship songs, they were all basically written in first person singular, right? So I, me, mine, myself. Nothing intrinsically wrong with that, but it just gives you this notion that we tend to think of Christianity as an individual thing. It's my religion, my faith, what I believe. Whereas history holds that we are a community of connected believers, that we are a community that walks through life together, walks in the footsteps of Jesus together, walks to our eternal home together. And so my question is, have modern Christians lost the idea that we are a community that walks together? I don't think that that's something that we've lost completely, but it's something that we should think about. It's something that we should bring intentionality into our connection with the church. The Jewish people, they had something in the book of Psalms called the Songs of Ascent. Ascent with the imagery, the idea of going up. Songs of Ascent, otherwise just known as pilgrim songs. And this was just a handful of songs, I think it's Psalm 120 through 134, that they sang or chanted or prayed or reflected on as they walked up, ascended towards Jerusalem. Jerusalem is like 2,500 feet above sea level, or 2,500 feet high, built on top of a mountain. And so as groups of pilgrims traveled to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover or the Feast of Tabernacles or whatever prescribed festival they were going to celebrate, as they made their way to Jerusalem, they would pray these psalms or sing these songs, right? And these psalms, in contrast with many of the other psalms that were written, are mostly written in the context of we. There are some that are written in first person, singular, but the majority of these pilgrim songs are written in the context of us, our, we. And I wanted to highlight Psalm 122, which is one of those pilgrim songs. This is what it says. I rejoiced with those who said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing in your gates, Jerusalem. Jerusalem is built like a city that is closely compacted together. That is where the tribes go up. The tribes of the Lord, to praise the name of the Lord according to the statute given to Israel. There stand the thrones for judgment, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be secure. May there be peace within your walls and security within your citadels. For the sake of my family and my friends, I will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your prosperity. And so you get that feeling of pilgrimage as it talks about letting us go to the house of the Lord, where the tribes go up to praise the name of the Lord. And similarly, as Christians and members not of the Jewish religion, but members of the church, Christians, we're not just walking with Jesus, we're walking with each other as we make our way through life. So this discipleship is not a single file line, it is a pilgrimage. Have you ever seen pilgrims in a modern setting? They walk together in groups. I'm convinced that one of the reasons that Jesus came to heal the lame and make the lame walk is so that those people could join in the life of the community again. And so think about that. Jesus says that he comes to heal the lame and make the lame walk. And I think one of the reasons why he does that is so that those people can make pilgrimages, become a part of the community once again, so that they can walk alongside of others and join in worship. In one deep, profound sense, Jesus heals us of our lameness, of our sins, takes that away, gives us the ability to walk alongside of others. so that we wouldn't have to do life alone, go through life alone. So I want us to think about ourselves as a community that walks, a community that loves, and a community that walks in the footsteps of Jesus, through life together, to an eternal home with God and with each other. And so we are a community that walks in, through, and to. So how does this get practical? Well, there are about 59 one another commands in the New Testament. You've probably heard them, right? Love one another. Be devoted to one another. Serve one another. They're scattered all throughout the New Testament. The one another word, one another in English is two words, but in the Greek it's one word derived from the Greek word allelon, which ironically sounds a lot like all alone, allelon, all alone, but means the opposite. It means one another. It means reciprocity, working together, one another. And so I want to focus on one of those one another verses, Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, which says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you fulfill the law of Christ." So that great imperative, that great command, carry each other's burdens. I want us to think about that a little bit. I want us to flesh that out. You can't carry somebody's burden unless you are walking alongside of them, unless you are right there with them, right? You can't carry somebody's burden, rejoice with those who are rejoicing, weep with those who are weeping, unless you are walking alongside of them. And the idea then is that we have to be a part of each other's lives. Like pilgrims eat together and sleep together and walk together. Or going back to our imagery last week of a monastery and the monks and the nuns and how they take their meals together and they work together and they spend a lot of their time together. We have to be a part of one another's lives in order to carry one another's burdens. And the image that I think of is of people traveling or carrying, backpacks or luggage or bags. And that eventually gets really heavy. And so the beauty of walking together is we can help each other with those heavy loads. The image of carrying each other's burdens, in fact, it doesn't even work if we are stationary. Because if we're just standing around, then we can just set our burdens down. But because we are a community that walks, we have to help each other carry those burdens. Now, in the context of Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, the idea is that, we struggle with sin. We struggle with temptation. And that temption, that sin, those are burdens. But they are not burdens that we are meant to carry by ourselves. We should have the kind of relationship where I can share with you my struggles with sin, my temptations or where I've stumbled. And instead of trying to carry that burden by myself, I can share that with you and you can pray for me. You can actually carry that burden with me. But the context of that can be, we can broaden that to just say that any burden that we are carrying, whether it's just the weight of, health issues, financial problems, worry or anxiety or depression, just any of the manifold burdens that we can carry through life. I have a child that isn't walking with the Lord, or I have, family who won't talk to me, or, the politics and the wars and everything going on is just overwhelming me. The beauty of walking together is we can share those burdens with one another. There's an old African proverb, you've probably heard it. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And that rings true. I think there's a biblical concept there that we ought to be a community that walks together because together we can go farther. So as we think about walking in Jesus' footsteps, walking through life together, walking to our eternal home, I want us to think about this. In walking as a community in Jesus' footsteps, we're walking in the way of love. Right? Intentional love, sacrificial love. As a community that walks through life together, we are walking in commitment to each other. We are committed to walk alongside of each other in the ups and in the downs of this journey. And as a community that walks to our eternal home, we are walking in perseverance towards that destination. So this week, let's think about how we can renew our commitment to walk with one another through the ups and downs of life. And maybe it just means inviting one of your brothers and sisters in Christ to go get coffee, or to go on an actual literal walk, or just, send them a text message, see how they're doing. But let's reach out to carry each other's burdens. Let's shed that kind of relational reluctance to self-isolate and deal with these things on our own. And let's pursue our relationships with one another through Christ, because the idea is that we are a community that walks. Blessings.